After the Second World War, two German states emerged: the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, and the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. How did East Germany, the GDR, look at its Nazi past? How did the GDR Marxist historians explain the Nazi past to their citizens? The GDR was kind of one of the successors of the Third Reich. I mean, they were both totalitarian. Well, in this video, you're going to learn about the East German perspective on the Nazi era and World War II. Keep watching. Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, I'm Stefan, I'm a Dutch history teacher and I like to hustle history for you. And if you find it interesting, well, consider subscribing and also hit that notification bell if you want to support me. You can do so via Patreon, PayPal, or via a super thanks. When on the 8th of May 1945 the German armies laid down their weapons, the division of Germany came into effect. According to Allied agreements, the territories in the east, East Prussia, Pomerania and Silesia, went to Poland and the USSR. In the west, the Western Allies, Great Britain, France and the US, set up their occupation zones. There was also the Tsar Protectorate. The basis of the future East German state was established by the Soviets. The Soviets had around 40% of German territory occupied, which was reduced to 28% after the transfers to Poland and the USSR I just mentioned. The Soviets did allow 4 political parties to develop in East Germany, but they had to work according to communist principles. In April 1946, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the SPD, and the Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, were forcefully merged to form the Socialist Unity Party, which later became the governing party of East Germany. Those who opposed this were arrested, jailed, or sent to labor camps. The Soviet Secret Service, the NKVD, had set up several concentration camps in East Germany, but sometimes using former Nazi camps. For a crucial year, Stalin let events in Germany float. He allowed his soldiers to introduce a regime of terror in the East, not exactly conducive to the future establishment of socialism. He seemed more preoccupied with looting what could be of use to the Soviets than with establishing order in his occupation zone. If the Soviet zone, after the initial chaos, for a while seemed to work better than the West, this was due not so much to Stalin as to the Red Army administrators and the German communists who had come back with them. They were more than ready to take over the centralized planning systems that had existed in Nazi Germany and to rely on them in order to get basic infrastructure and production going wherever possible. In 1949, the GDR was established. It's worth noting that communist countries are notably history-minded. They see men moving towards socialism or communism. They base their legitimacy on history. So, how did GDR Marxist historians explain the Third Reich and the Nazi era as well as World War II? Well, for that we have to take a look at the Third Reich's predecessor. I'm talking about the Weimar Republic. Both the Weimar Republic and the Third Reich were seen by the GDR historians as states where capitalism has declined into crisis-ridden, self-destructive monopolism. And this is a very important thing, because the Marxist historians, they view the Third Reich as a capitalist society. But this was not really the case, because Hitler made use of a planned economy. Also, the communists, they never spoke about Nazis. No, they spoke about fascists. And there's a difference between fascism and Nazism. I mean, they have a lot of similarities, but there are also differences. Now, why did the Marxist historians speak about fascists? Nazism is an abbreviation of National Socialism, and yeah, that didn't really sit well with the communists who were like striving towards socialism. The difference between socialism and communism, yeah, that's a whole theoretical debate I'm not gonna get into. I mean, go all out in the comments if you want. I do want to quote: "From the Marxist perspective, the resort to fascism involved no major change of policy on the part of the great bourgeoisie, but merely a shift from what is viewed as a bourgeoisie parliamentary dictatorship to a fascist terrorist one. The difference between bourgeois capitalism and fascism was one of degree. Now what is interesting is that one fundamental aspect of Nazism is being ignored by the Marxist historians. And I'm talking about the leadership principle, the Führer cult. By Marxist historians, Hitler was just seen as a frontman of monopolist interests, and paying attention to him would divert attention to the real culprits. And another reason why the Marxist historians don't mention this, I think, is because they had leadership cultism as well. Therefore, it's understandable they don't elaborate on it as much. Now, where they also don't elaborate on are the inhumanities of racism that were carried out by the Nazis. These were all characteristics of the capitalist order GDR historians believed the Nazis were part of. According to them, Nazism could never be defeated in the current system, but by the destruction of this system. Mass action was therefore needed. But the German communists, they failed to set this up. Also because the Social Democrats were unwilling, and therefore the communists, they lacked the strength. In the East German view, the Nazi era was a culmination of state monopolist capitalism. The step up in armaments production and lowering of living standards was proof of this. And that's where the true cause of World War II lies, according to them. For Marxists, however, the evidence concerning the dominant role of the monopoly bourgeoisie is conclusive, since monopolists must go to war in their unending new markets and raw materials. In the run-up to World War II, the British and French had a policy of appeasement, the policy of making political, material or territorial concessions to Germany in order to avoid war. Rather than a national policy, GDR historians think this was a class policy. If the British and the French would take part into an anti-Nazi coalition earlier, World War II could have been prevented. And to be fair, there is some truth in this, because they didn't acknowledge the security needs of the USSR. The authors hail the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact because it kept the isolated USSR, the socialist state the Western powers refused to join, out of a war. But in reality, it postponed the war for the USSR, and it made the Nazis and the Soviets allies in all but name, not to mention the suffering of the countless people living in their spheres of influence. The phony war was seen as an extension of the appeasement policy, and the fall of France was due to the French reactionary class rather yielding to fascism instead of fighting it. The British won the Battle of Britain only because the Germans were busy focusing their attention on the East again. The German New Order that was carried out in the occupied countries with its exploitation and forced labor was seen as the ultimate monopoly capitalism. The fact that different population groups, for example Nordic people from Norway versus Slavic people in Poland, were treated way differently is largely being ignored. The Axis invasion of the USSR was seen as the ultimate war of imperialism versus socialism. It was the main front of the war, which is true. Most German divisions fought on the Eastern Front. And it was also the front where the war was being decided, which, to be fair, is also true. The Western help to the USSR, think of the Land-Lease Act, which basically kept the Soviet Union from falling apart, yeah, that is mostly ignored. And however, the GDR historians acknowledge that the Western powers made sacrifices as well, such as at D-Day, the landings in Normandy. They do claim that the Allies postponed these landings in order so that the Nazis could inflict more losses on the Soviet Union. And although this is true to a certain degree, we must also not forget that the United States wanted to liberate Western Europe rather than it come under the influence of the USSR. The extermination of the Jews, the final solution, was, together with the mass murder of Slavic people and other non-Germans, seen as a perpetuation of the role of the German monopolists. The key element of Nazism was its racial doctrine. Marxist historians view this as a tool of capitalism. To be fair, although the racial component of Nazism is therefore largely ignored, there is some truth in the claim that the racial policies were also used by the Western powers to exercise power over their colonies. although the racial doctrines of the Nazis were way more extreme. World War II was not just a military contest, but was fought over revolutionary social issues also. Each German literature devotes much attention to the communist plans for a post-war Germany. The National Committee, Free Germany, a German anti-Nazi organization that operated in the Soviet Union and paved the way for the first true socialist state on German soil, thanks to the USSR. Unfortunately, GDR historians wrote, the Western powers blocked this, and this culminated into the division of Germany. One GDR historian claimed, historians must not only interpret the world, they must also change it. And this brings us to the essence of history. What is history? History is studying the past via available sources. A key element to communist historians is politics. Therefore, history must be written in such a way that it is in line with communist politics. Questions like, to what extent is this really the case, are barely asked by Marxist historians. Their narrative must be in line with their current politics. Thanks to my patrons, you see their names on the screen right now, and a special thanks to Thomas Zabiega, Damien Wallace, Connor, Philip Jordan, Marcus Kaas, Nick Terranova, Haley, Mark Littlehale, Janusz Jojankiewicz, Joanne, Juster Tabel, Tanya Dixie, Henry Clarkson, Rob Park, Andrea Martic, Susana Di Bella, John Beach, Fabrizio, Way Back History, Fernando Lopez Ojeda, Luis Pichera, and Mike West. If you are interested in a series about the German perspective on the Second World War while it was going on, I have a playlist for you right here. I want to thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I see you later.